Placements by Kevin Clinton. For you. Chapter 1. Hum hum. Hum 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 hum. Alex was getting ready for the big date with a better friend of the better part of the decade, Alice, or as they called each other for less confusions, Al Pal and Miss Alyssa. For further use in this story, we'll call them that as well, or maybe just Al and Lissa. It really all depends on how the story plays out. The date was set for a concert at their local amphitheater. Al was dressed tight and snappy, with a flapped-out mock tuxedo and an accessory top hat. It wasn't a costume party or anything of the sort, but it was the fall season. The concert was one of those large ensembled big bands with a singer who'd infamously made it through to the top of the industry, claiming iconic artists' lesser-known music, albeit thrown away by the other artists, as her own. The band helped out a lot, with better justice to actually learning the songs, even though the infamous real talent and what most people were fans of over was her making the songs her own. Most people compared the live singing style to, well, they couldn't really compare it to anything they'd ever heard. It just sounded somehow familiar every time. His phone rang, and so he glanced to it and saw the fellow Alex's name on the ringer. He gave a pause and a slight breath, and finally answered it with a fancy, "Hello." "Hey, Al," she said, and adding a bit of timber, "Benjamin says he'll meet us there." "Oh, good," Al sighed, playing it off as a breath of relief. "How are we going to spot him?" "What do you mean? Are we supposed to meet him anywhere in particular, or are we to wander the hills and do a Benjamin dance?" "Oh, haha. No, he said he'll wait for us before showtime just inside the gate." "Well, alright then." "Yes, and I'll be there to pick you up soon," Lissa notified him. "That is, you are there and ready." "Ready, yes," he said as he drew the telephone device away slightly and grumbled toward it, clasping a false valentine prepared for the evening. The personal valentine was an odd touch for this particular date, as it was only occasional that he'd ever brought along gifts for her, and Al wanted to take things to another level perhaps this night. He wasn't sure just what level that would be, and so he clasped onto their special event passes a moment to renew his sureness that they weren't counterfeit. He scored the passes for the evening from one friend at the venue, promising a tour of the backstage area, although no guarantees they would meet any of the musicians, but that it was also a possibility once access was to be granted backstage. Al released his clasp and the passes dangled on the coat hook near the front entrance to his ground level flat and went to freshen up for the date. Chapter 2. Knock, knock, knock. Al opened the door and was astonished to see Lissa standing in a coat he'd never before seen her wearing. "Let's not make too big a fuss tonight, shall we?" she teased. He had first propositioned the evening to her a week prior. The two were regular pals on the town on quite the occasion, although they never made a fuss about ruling themselves into the relationship being mutually exclusive. After all, the reason they met and made friends with each other in the first place was over a cafe discussion about the difficulties for either making any sort of first move, and things just happened from there. "Lead the way," Al glistened. "All right," agreed Miss Lissa. "No fuss, no muss," chuckled Lissa after some paces toward her ride. Chapter 3. "We should call him," Lissa poised, puzzled at locating Benjamin. "It isn't like him to be late." "He's probably looking for us, thinking the same thing," Al reassured. "Go ahead and give him a call." "Shh," Miss Lissa motioned, already doing so. "Hello?" she said into her device. "No, we're already here." "Where are you?" Oh, okay. "Well, call then when you've arrived." "He's on his way?" Al beckoned. "He said he's held up in traffic," Lissa answered, unusually disappointed, "and to go on without him, that he doesn't think he's going to make the concert." "Are we to meet him somewhere else?" asked Al, after a long moment of paused reading Lissa's expression of doubt and nervousness. "There's something I should tell you, Al. Is everything all right?" Alex, Benjamin and I have been seeing a lot of each other since you last saw me, and he's been starting to ask, she started. We've been talking more recently about engagement these last few weeks, and I think he's worried about the friendship between you and me. Is that why you think he's canceled? Al suggested, trying to conceal the agony of betrayal. He hasn't canceled. He's taxiing here to take me to be alone somewhere because he doesn't feel he ought to trust your confidence, he says. Are you going? Yes. Chapter 4. Al tightened his hand to his pocket wherein he kept the evening backstage passes. He tried his best to grip what had just been told him. He even thought of making efforts to miss Lissa to stay and enjoy what he'd had planned, but he figured that wouldn't be of any use. He finally managed to speak, however, most of what was on his mind, and without resorting to the passes from his pocket. I had something special planned for this evening with you, he finally had wavered. Well, wouldn't you have been the bigger man? Lissa argued to him. You're going to begin pleading for me to stay now, aren't you? Well, what would you have me say? He said, with a slight raise in his tone. We're supposed to just leave behind an entire trust and faith we've been building for years because someone's jealous over a crush on you? It's a little more than a crush, dearie. Then go and enjoy, and I'll be around to call when. He caught himself. Go and enjoy. You know, it was never going to work between us, she said as she went to take his hand from his side. This was far from a loud scene they were making, but was certainly argumentative. Don't you? Why's that, Alice? He said, accepting her gesture to hold his hand a moment and even squeezing back a little briefly. Look around, pal. She gazed only slightly from his eye contact but didn't stray. You've something special planned for tonight. Amongst your surroundings? Maybe you'd be better enjoying this show tonight on your own. I was only here to have known you a little more, and I think I have. Where should we go? Just us then. It's too late, Alex. Chapter 5. Although Al was certainly on high-end nerves during the concert, he decided he ought to stay and utilize the passes his friend had gotten him. After all, he went through the trouble, and the concert started with a bang right away. He mostly moped, but he wasn't going to just go home admitting defeat. He figured he may as well enjoy some music admitting defeat. When the concert had ended, he found his way to the main stage, presenting his passes and even told his story to the stage grips. Come on, motioned Gary, stage grip number 1. I'll introduce you to the roadies. Hidden behind second curtain and unbeknownst to Alex was the young and skillfully aware Loretta Lorrance, one of the stronger offstage voices during the evening. Miss Lawrence wasn't the main vocal up on front stage, but she sang quite astonishing harmony, so much so that hardly anyone in the crowd would notice. She stood witness from her hiding spot to Al's story, and then he noticed the slightly waving curtain as Gary the Grip motioned his hand toward the stage. Al couldn't make of what to think, as all he saw really was her hand throwing forward the curtain. So he just figured she was another stagehand. Gary motioned him around the stage as the roadies were tearing down most of the equipment, lugging amplifiers around and such. He wasn't sure what about this would have impressed Alice so much, and just figured they'd tour the stage area and behind the curtain sparks could fly. He really didn't know what he was doing very much at all, let alone now that Alice was gone to Benjamin, but he moved anyway to Gary and gestured an inquiry whether it'd be okay to stroll behind, merely for the simple amusement of it all. Sure, that pass will get you around the whole stage, said Gary, and just as long as you don't leave the stage, you can go on behind. Thanks, said Alex. Just be sure that the pass is showing around the whole time. It's got the lanyard to wear. Alex gave him a wave and another. Thanks, receding behind the curtain, and when he turned to stroll, he noticed Miss Lawrence right away, perched to stage left design and looking back at him. She smiled slightly and waved, and Alex looked around the stage to be sure she was waving at him. He smiled best he could manage back, and waved slowly and unsurely. That's when she arose from her perched stance and started walking towards him. He had to look around the stage again, and even back in front of the curtain he'd just come behind to be sure she was indeed walking to him, and by the time he turned back to see her walking, she had arrived. hand extended in greeting. "Loretta Lorrance," she said. "You're," Alex said, rather startled. "You're part of the crew?" "Vocal stylings," she corrected. There was something to her voice which was awe-striking to Alex. There was a slight lisp with the word "stylings." Something else took him aback as well, as he didn't think meeting any performer was going to have him in such a panic. He made acquaintance with plenty before this, as like many there was a short period in his life he'd performed himself, and he even knew he was even quite good at it. "I'm sorry, I didn't recognize you, I guess." "You wouldn't have," she replied. "I sing from the side stage and find it difficult keeping up with the spotlights." She was gesturing with her hands as she spoke, as if to tell him, well, that he wouldn't have recognized her. She was enunciating her words kindly and more conscious of her gestures as she spoke the second half of her reply, moving which way and about with her whole body as she would have been dancing her way along to keep up with fast-moving stage lights. "You do seem pretty suitably animated well enough," Alex laughed, being sure to clearly speak back to her, however taken back. Although this made for her to brush her hair to one side and glance the same way slightly unnerved, she did eventually manage to speak again. "Thank you," she blushed, fanning her hand in front of her face before landing her arms side-stroked. "This is actually the first I've sang here. Would you care to take a short tour of the theater with me?" "You're really a performer then, aren't you?" Alex questioned. "Do I seem otherwise?" Alex took a long scan of Miss Lawrence's expression, taking to notice a slightly insulted one for not believing her at her word, with also a fellow musician's notice that she became at least a little insecure at how she presented herself as one. "Of course," he answered after the moment. "I'd recognize that anywhere. Shall we walk then?" She politely spoke, and taking to leaning past him while she pulled back the curtain to see how empty the audience section had become, and then quickly turning her head back for his response. "Okay," Alex delivered. "I've had a rough day though, Miss Lawrence. Maybe just a short one." Miss Lawrence stood back how she was, and with a puzzled expression this time. "Never you mind. It's just my own day and my own troubles with," Alex explained fairly frantically. "Well, never you mind anyway." "Okay," Miss Lawrence agreed, "and call me Loretta. I'm not that sorry." Chapter 6. The two made their way to the side of the stage in front second curtain but behind the presentation one still, and exiting down a side staircase against a direction of tapes on the ground and in the shapes of pointing arrows. Alex looked around to be sure no one saw him doing this, as he had been directed to remain on the stage. He stopped at the last step down, and she stopped with him as he confessed this to her. "This pass only grants me stage access," he said. "Where exactly are you taking me?" "Slow down, Einstein," she chuckled. "I'm only taking you back to the audience sections, and we'll walk the path that goes around the hill where there's a fountain." Alex sighed, relieved at this, and yet couldn't help wondering if she was merely trying to mosey him away. Of course, he thought, there wasn't much to an empty stage anyway, and maybe he ought to be going back home now. Anyway. "You look worried," Loretta noted. "Worried?" Alex asked, mostly unconscious of his thoughts. In fact, this made him stumble a little, and she walked a pace or two ahead, hardly noticing he'd even responded. "Did you enjoy the show?" she asked, turning back to wait for him to catch up again. "Yes," he assured, "very much. You know, you'd hardly even notice my harmony, they say." "Who does?" he said, stumbling again, and deciding to just stop altogether before catching up fully to her. "They say if I'm doing it right, I think," she clarified, "to keep me from really shining when I sing for this theater." She placed her hands to her hips, waiting patiently for Alex and scanning back to the stage from which she'd come a few yards now to look back and scan. Alex turned back with a sort of grimace and then waved his hand away at the stage crews as he jumped quickly to catch up to her now. This made Loretta take some small steps backward from her scan of the stage. slowly and carefully, but then she stopped again and moved back toward Alex to meet her right hand to his left arm in a slugging nudge. Of course, I see the challenge and I raised them my own, she laughed. How's that? Alex teased at her, thinking he fully understood anyway how she meant until she pulled her hair behind her ear again with her right hand and pointed to it with her left. All I know is they hired me to do a job and I'm going to do it, she jested, even if no one knows my way. Meaning what exactly? Alex asked, bewildered. Loretta was turning again to walk forwardly on the path this time, with or without Alex, and so smoothly that he seemed to have to jog just to keep up with her. Chapter 7. Neither really spoke until arriving at the fountain. They just walked, but then Alex had to ask once he could get Loretta's attention. He waved his hand in front of her eyes a little to capture it. Yes? Loretta inquired. Miss Lawrence, Alex began, are you only trying to get rid of me from the stage area? No, Loretta consoled. No, I was going to sit with you and by the fountain here for a while and make small talk. You were supposed to have been calling me by Loretta, I thought. I'm sorry, he explained. It's just that I've been rejected already once tonight. Rejected? She asked, stressing the word to ask if that's what really he said. Rejected, he poised and looking at her. Loretta's eyes were looking down at his chin, and even though he'd been trying to manage with her eye contact for much of the walk, this time it was of grander importance, he thought, for her to capture his dismally honest expression and to look up at him. Loretta sensed the obligation and would look up some, but then she'd be looking right back down to his chin to watch for him to speak again, because she wanted to show genuine interest in him now. It may have only been slight genuine interest, but she had it nonetheless, and even had since seeing him make his pleas to the stage crew. If there was an appropriate time to show that to him, it was now. Did somebody stand you up tonight? Joshed Loretta from another one of those arm-slugging nudges. I don't know if I really want to talk about it, Alex stated. I was telling that Gary fellow and some of the crew before we met, and I don't want you to think I've been just moping to anyone who's listening. You can say, she sweetened. I'd rather hear it from you if that's the case. Well, let's go with the short version, shall we? I can go with that. A dear friend left me tonight for good, and though it really freshened things into perspective for our relationship, why she said she was leaving, why did she say she was leaving? Because this is my scene, and because I had had something in mind for us together only in my kind of a setting, was why she said, Alex explained. Do you come to a lot of concerts with her? That's the thing, I don't understand. We've been to lots of them together. Why would she say that this is your only scene then? Isn't it the both of your fortes? I guess less glamorous could have been a better forte for us. I think she sensed my intention in getting the better of me. What did you have planned? I really didn't even know going into this what the plans were from my end, he said, certainly moping all over again. The best sign of a musician, Loretta counseled him. That's something I do know. I am a musician, Alex gleamed, as that particularly dismal expression of his turned to a smile, and more than just politely it do so. I thought so, and a good one at that, I'd say. Chapter 8. Well, this was enjoyable, Loretta told Alex, getting up from her seat at the fountain. The two had merely been sitting in silence, save for the occasional observation and a few comments about birds that had been flocking and how they'd wished they'd bred, and things of that nature. As Loretta hopped off her seat and onto her bouncing feet, Alex gave a furrowed brow of surprise to her. Was this it? Was it the end of the mock tour already? Enjoyable? He asked. Really? You look puzzled, Loretta said, a bit astonished as she looked back toward him. Oh, it's just, Just what? I'm just curious why you've been so courteous. I told you, she said. I only really wanted to see the theater for myself and how the stage looked at a distance. Thank you for being my partner for that. I feel like I've gotten the pass's worth from meeting someone so polite from the stage. That's rare to find in my experience. And it just seemed a little eccentric and, how do you say, genuine? Are you trying to tell me that I'm welcome, mister? Mister? What's your name? Oh, Alex said, flustered. I hadn't told you that, had I? I can see how you mean by the word eccentric, she called back after jogging back toward the main stage, someone waving. It's Alex, Alex shouted to her. She didn't turn back to acknowledge him, and so he jogged slowly to be by her side so he could say again. Loretta turned back to notice him taking after her so quickly paced, and suddenly began herself to trot toward the stage area, quite a lot faster. Alex prepared to trot alongside behind her, if only to catch up nearside the crew before he'd head home for the night. But he stopped himself when he saw crowd security running to her from the person she'd been waving to. He could hardly make out what she grumbled forward to them, and yet he did faintly understand it. She was speaking aloud to herself that it must have seemed too good to be true when he took after her so fondly, pounding the ground with his feet as he must have been. The crowd control security arrived to her and conversed for only a brief moment or two before taking toward him, walking more heavily and quickly than even they'd run to her. When they arrived to him, hands beside their hips hovering over their batons, one was motioning for him to calm himself and another was preparing to speak, while a third circled to Alex's side to get behind him. It's about time you've had it gone for the evening, the second said sternly. Wouldn't you say, friend? It's Alex, Alex said again toward Miss Lorrance. It's Alex. Alex proceeded to repeat speaking his name loudly toward Miss Lorrance until one of the security hands turned back while continuing to escort her arm in arm back to the main stage area. I think he's saying it's Alex, the escorting hand finally said to Loretta, who finally turned back to make out what was happening behind her. Alex, she shouted back to the security fiasco that was taking place around Alex, and covered her hands over her own ears as she shouted and watched for his reaction. The three men were hovering around Alex and beginning the circle, taking his hands behind his back with hand restraints to take him from the show, when he shouted once again to her, Yeah, my name. Alex, Miss Lawrence. It's Alex Manchester. All right, then, the second guardsman did announce, sort of peacefully. We'll make sure she gets the message. Are we going to walk peacefully to the shuttle now? One of the other security hands asked Alex, taking away the backstage pass, which dangled from his pocket, and holding it up for one of the others to photograph a quick snapshot of it. Alex kept any further vocal arguments to himself from there, after glancing to Miss Lawrence to find her waving frantically and shaking no with her head, and apologetically in some way. Alex walked away with the security hands, taking him to the shuttle he was to ride to one of the bus stops outside the park. There, he was offered one token for the bus fare and advised to use it to get where he needed to be for the night. Alex's apartment was so far to the other side of the metro area, however, and he knew one token wouldn't be enough to make it there. So he boarded the bus from the shuttle after the security hands of his released him, asking the driver for a favor as he did so. The driver nodded to Alex that he indeed could be taken to a nearside hotel room he could book from there and worry about getting home the following morning. This was alright by Alex, since after all he had funds ready for any type of fix, even including the fix for which he now suddenly needed to spend them. Once the room was booked for the night, he telephoned to the theater's information office for further information about the incident and to clear anything up on his end if needed. He was so taken by surprise at everything, even after the park security explained to him just as he was getting out of the shuttle ride what had gone wrong between him and Miss Lawrence since his telling him his side of the story. What happened? They inquired, almost in unison. She asked my name as we were already starting to walk toward the stage again, and didn't hear, so I tried to catch up, and she just took off, flagging me all down when she saw me chasing after her. Loretta Lorrance is a deaf performer for the theater. She didn't hear you chasing behind her. She must have felt the ground trodden when you started to chase and was startled. Do you understand that? She doesn't hear? She's deafened, yes, and she hasn't strayed before with any fans like that. So we had no idea what really happened that had her frightened, but from your story that might have been it. Are there going to be any repercussions over this? Alex asked in awe. We'll need to reconvene her side of the story, and the theater reserves the right to take action from there if they choose to. Will you tell her for me I'm sorry that I startled her then? Alright, Guy, we'll relay the message. Chapter 9. Hello, this is Alex Manchester, and I was calling to... Alex began. We were hoping you'd call, Mr. Manchester, said the receptionist for the theater's information line, stopping Alex mid-sentence. Miss Lawrence is here now and wants to speak with you through her interpreter. Say again? This is Deandra, Miss Lawrence's interpreter, started the new voice on the theater's end of the telephone. Speak to me as if you were speaking to her, and how you do. This is very new to me, Alex noted to begin with. Is that to me or to Miss Lawrence? Well, both, I guess, and, well, never mind. I've called to apologize for any misunderstanding. The bit about chasing after her, we think you have to explain your intentions some. She wants to know what it was over that you ran after her so abruptly. I didn't know if she'd heard me calling after her and just wanted to be certain I'd answered back to an inquiry. I was a little confused over whether it would ever be received, and the next I knew I was surrounded by stage security. Was there anything else? I wasn't sure I'd ever have spoken with her again, and while that was all I wanted to say at the time and goodbye, now what I want to add is goodbye and thank you for the delightful walk together. That's all I need, she says, and thank you for explaining yourself. Thank you, Deandra. Have a nice night, Mr. Manchester. The theater will notify you by postage carrier if there are any actions to be had against, although for now it seems you might be alright, and in the future you might consider the feelings of the oppositions to your whims. Goodbye. Chapter 10. Weeks had passed since the troublesome activity at the theater with Miss Loretta Lorrance, and still no word came from them about it, nor from Alice about the dispute she and Alex had taken to one another over Benjamin. Then, oddly enough, Miss Lawrence reached out to Alex personally, inviting him incidentally by the post service to a local jazz club to hear her sing in a privately ticketed performance. Alex, of course, debated whether he should go and whether he might ever have another opportunity at interacting with the likes of someone like Loretta, and he had wanted to hear her singing voice as a stage front with fellow musicians since making acquaintance weeks prior. He wasn't clear whether it would have been proper to browse for events she was party to on the internet, only to be in an audience who, as she put it, wouldn't even know she was singing at all if she did so for the proper harmony. He understood how she meant that, as he'd done his share of vocal harmonizing in his own day. He also, however, somehow felt he would nitpick Walt to hear the unforgettable voice in a way that might mock the way she'd added that part, if doing it right, and so forth. Finally, after what little debating was actually needed from Alex, he gathered his nerves and deciding he would take Miss Lawrence up on the invitation. So when the evening came, he dressed his better self and went to the show to be surrounded by a hushed crowd of awe-stricken fans at the songs she sang, and they struck a strong heart in him for feminine outlook. She glanced to his seat some during the song performances, mainly speaking to him in doing so during a song about the wolf on the prowl, as it seemed to Alex to be speaking a smile which seemed to him to read, "This one's about us, Mr. Manchester." She glanced often during the songs, and to many people in the audience, actually, so Alex knew there was only a small bit of something special about him for it. However, it kept on gripping him so each time. Chapter 11. Fantastic, Alex wrote on the coaster napkin which he hadn't been using for his drink and was instead saving for this note to the band. Thank you so much to Miss Loretta Lorrance for the invitation. He also wrote one line down. And then, almost adding a third liner note personally to Miss Lawrence, he stopped himself and simply wrote his name, Alex. As he was handing the napkin note to the drummer during the band's teardown period after the show, he said to pass this around to the full ensemble when suddenly he received a light slugging nudge on his left arm from behind him a couple times. When he turned quickly to confront what was happening and slightly stepping away from his own panic, it was Loretta standing there, a drinking glass slightly raised as she ducked back some herself as well. Now we're even, she chuckled, and flinched away a little farther to mock him, while reaching another nudge, this time on his other arm. Fantastic set, Alex found the words finally, enunciating them as clearly as could be. Of course it was, she answered back. I'm no amateur, you know. I'm so glad I came, and thank you so much for the invitation. Don't sweat it. I'm glad you came too. Let's not make a big deal out of it though, yeah? Do you play a lot of these club shows? Yeah. We musicians have got to make a living somehow. Would it be daft of me to request being put onto your mailing list for them? Wow, Mr. Manchester. You boil right down to it, don't you? It really is just that good to see you, and was that fantastic of a show. Do you really mean that? One of the fellow ensemble musicians from the evening passed Alex's napkin along to Miss Lawrence at that very moment, causing her to glance up from Alex's conversation and over to the fellow musician, who said to her, We're pretty sure he means it, Starry. Loretta laughed downwardly and then glanced back to Alex, informing that he may indeed sign his name and information to the band's mailing list, and that she'll be sure to invite him to shows she feel are appropriate to his demographic, although only if to have made a standing impression that night. A standing impression? Alex considered aloud to her. Yes, whatever have you been doing with your times anyway? And did you ever find any resolve with the problem factor from that night before when we walked? With that, what was her name? Do you mean Alice? Alex asked, taken slightly defensive over Alice, even without having found any resolve. That's just like your name, only without the sound of okay, let's say. Yeah, there was always a lot of confusion between her and myself over that. Well, what? No more confusion now? I think she and I are pretty well through with, unfortunately as it is to say so. Well, you keep on with the bandwagon, maybe you'll find someone who shares better interests. Who have we here? Asked the man, taking to Loretta's side, and as she took to looking to see what the man was saying. The man spoke up again. Who is this? Well, Alex began, shook by the man's demeanor, just enough to guess what was up. I don't think we've been properly introduced, the man said, extending for a handshake. The name goes yours first, yeah? Alex stated, shaking firmly. Alex, Loretta mentioned. This is my booking agent, Dodd. Dodd, the man finally said. Always a pleasure to greet a fellow fan of Loretta's. Wouldn't you know, said Loretta to Dodd, that this is Alex? Mr. Alex Manchester from the theater, when he was nice enough to walk a tour of the park with me. Chapter 12. Is this Mr. Alex Manchester? Said Dodd. Yeah, I'm the guy that chased after her, Alex groaned, although she did get me back just now. No, I mean, I've heard of your music from years ago. It's wonderful stuff, man. Really? You know my music? Loretta took a long sip of her drink from its mixing straws and curtsied her way out of the conversation with a snicker to Alex, taking her time to since Dodd paid the compliment. She moseyed then toward the stage to help with lugging most of the gear out the back door exit from it, while Dodd paid more compliments even still. As a matter of fact, Dodd said, finally cutting to the point after a few notes about Alex's music, how would you feel about auditioning to open for the act one night? I haven't really done much music very seriously for a long time, Alex answered. Here's my card then, Dodd listened, taking a small business card from his vest pocket. Give a call if you decide you want to try it anyway. Alex took the business card and saved it in his back pocket for later study. He mingled with some of the other audience members for the remainder of the show, and hadn't seen much, if any, of the band members since taking the card. This was probably for the better, since he'd already said what he'd wanted to say with Miss Lawrence, and since he'd been propositioned the business deal by the booking agent, Dodd, who he also didn't see again until he was departing for the evening. Dodd was giving him a wave from the doorway goodbye, as Alex turned back to scan the venue one last time before climbing into his car to drive home. And so he waved back with slightly more enthusiasm than earlier that night. He'd been considering most of the evening, actually, since talking with Dodd, how it might be nice after all to open for an ensemble, if only for that one reason. He really hadn't played any shows in the past few years and considered himself washed up a little. However, he did think it could be a grand party to collaborate his skills against a brand new audience, different from the small group of following he'd had years before when he was playing shows as years ago he had. All the encompassing nerves he had felt prior to going to hear the stage step from Miss Lawrence had fluttered away by now, though. Alex had indeed been sure to sign on to the mailing list for more invitations, and he didn't want to ruin that if it turned out that he was only a washed-up musician and would fail the audition to open. He didn't want to put any fault to them wanting him in more audience attendances, and so he never did end up calling on the offer from Dodd. He did, however, mention it occasionally to Loretta Lorrance at various local shows he was invited to, since that first local venue show, how he was offered the opportunity to which she would usually sport encouraging words, although she never actually fully advised him to do so. Loretta and Alex remained well acquainted with each other, and she even has invited him to her stage during some performances to play songs of his own, even if they've never been formally auditioned. Although it's rare for him to accept the offer from anyone, he's been tempted to some of the time, and especially did sing one performance gem on stage with her, for which the fans just adored. The song itself wasn't entirely of the same importance to them as to their fans, who only knew some of the story to how and why the two actually originally met. Although Loretta kept the name Lawrence for her stage persona, she finally agreed to marry Alex one fine fall day in the month to which they met, when he proposed during a walk through the park to a show at the theater where they had, stopping down to his knee at the fountain and asking she wouldn't run away at the thought of it. That's when he took to the small box ring and presented it, asking her hand to take things to a new level. The end.